USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review from Monday, February 28th, 2022. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. This podcast is brought to you by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. Well, how about Minnesota, the Big Ten regular season champion? Double shutout wins over Wisconsin by a large margin. Meanwhile, second place Michigan got swept at Notre Dame. I'm sure everybody was picking Minnesota for a sweep, but maybe not by that margin. And let's ask this question: is Minnesota the best team in college hockey right now?
I'm not sure best team, but they're darn good, and they're playing great hockey. Two good shutouts. They were getting scoring from everywhere this weekend, and that helps. The Big Ten coaches got it right. They picked Minnesota as the preseason favorite, and I didn't understand that one, but obviously they know a lot more about the Big Ten than I do. I thought that, Michigan with all their draft picks would be a highly favored team, and that, they were still picked second. And obviously the coaches got that right too, but I'm really impressed. They've gone on a run here with basically using a kid that was a second string goalie to begin the year. They did it without Olympians. They did it this weekend with their Olympians back. I think that this team has a lot of confidence right now playing for Bob Motzko. He's getting good results.
You know what, Ed? And your question is are they the best team in college hockey? And I think you want to play your best hockey in the playoffs. And they're peaking at the right time. Because I think if you go back and go to the archives of our show, I think in December we were wondering what was Minnesota. And like you said, they got a lot going well at the right time. And they may not be the best team in college hockey, but they're the best team that's playing the right way at the right time, if that makes any sense. They are doing everything they need to do at the right time to peak for the NCAA tournament. You don't want to peak too early, and you certainly don't want to be leaking oil right now. And, going into the playoffs, 2 wins is peaking. Going into the playoffs with 2 losses, little bit of leaking oil. So you question where you're at. So yes, did they get it right? The coaches did, but they're playing the best hockey right now heading into to playoff time.
How about Justin Close? 10-3, I think, is the record right now. His first 2 collegiate shutouts. He has more than filled the gap in goal, and he's got to be a big part of why Minnesota is playing so well and playing with that amount of confidence.
I would think so. When you know that your goalie is going to make the big saves, and I, getting to watch bits and pieces of both of those games this weekend, he made some huge saves. It wasn't like Wisconsin was just dominated both nights and couldn't get near the net. Justin Close had to make a few huge saves, and I think it was last week I read a quote from Bob Motzko that said something in the likes of, I guess we didn't really know what we had with Justin Close. We should have been playing him more earlier because his number is just phenomenal since he's been given that starter role. And I know he lost a game earlier. I think it was to Alaska. And I, it made me question how, what was going to happen with Minnesota, but he's gotten it together. Obviously, the coaching staff has done a great job of bringing him along and developing him. And you've got a bona fide starter, bona fide number 1 right now in that program. And he could do some real damage in the playoffs.
How's LaFontaine feel?
Well, when it's time to turn pro, I guess it's time to turn pro. As Red Berenson used to say, when a player was ready to go to the NHL, he'd be happy to drive them to the airport. Before we move on, I do want to take a side note here about the situation with Tony Granato. Right now, Wisconsin with a winning percentage below what it was during Mike Eves' last season as the Badgers coach. During Eves' 14 seasons, 7 NCAA appearances, a national championship, and a runner-up. Mike Eves had 4 losing seasons in 14 behind the bench. Granato now has 4 in 6 seasons. He's got to be feeling the heat right now.
Wow, you go tight on this right off the bat, Ed. You're going off script a little bit and throwing some controversial segments. you never want to see a coach lose their job or be in jeopardy, because obviously as a coach, I don't want to be that way. And obviously they've had their struggles, but Tony Granato is a very good hockey coach. He's got a very good staff there. I think they'll be just fine, but you can't dispute the record. And but that being said, I think that he's, as an alum, and the staff that they've put together, that's the right staff. Is there changes to be made? I don't know that. I'm not on the inside. That's going to be made at higher levels in Wisconsin, but the staff they hired to replace Mike Eaves is the right staff.
Yeah, we know it's a results-oriented business, and results, your record is who you are. But, I think you got to kind of a coaching staff a little bit of slack when you lose, the Hobie Baker winner from a season ago. And it happens that you're going to bounce from first place, a season ago down to the middle bottom of the Big Ten pack. Listen, I've never in my years of journalism ever tried to call for a coach's job or say that somebody should or shouldn't be fired. That I think is, as Derek just said, that's a conversation that has to happen within the walls of a university and between athletic directors and presidents and their trusted advisors. But, I think that Tony Granato is a great coach. He's proven that, at many different levels. And I think that it's a tough season that they just went through, and especially after getting the hope so high a year ago and winning a Big Ten and, getting back to the NCAA tournament. That is one that stings a little bit more, but I'm not going to sit here and say that, that means you need to take his job out from under him.
I hope that athletic directors have a little patience, and university presidents and whoever else is involved has a little patience right now when there is so much turmoil and change in the game between the one-year transfer rule and what that does with free agency, the extra year still available for players, and just what happens to a team when players turn pro. I think there needs to be a little bit more room for patience. But with that said, let's talk about North Dakota. They swept the weekend. They are just on the edge of clinching the NCHC. Won 6 in a row, 8-1-1 in their last 10. And we were wondering what was up with that team when they had lost 2 to Cornell and 2 to Western Michigan. They have turned things around. They are on the verge of a regular season championship. And Brad Berry has had to have done just a remarkable job with what he lost and what he had in injuries along the way. So I guess the question is, how impressive is this that they've been able to pull it off?
Well, you got 2 teams right now with North Dakota and Minnesota that are playing their best. And it's good for college hockey. It's good for college hockey when you get the premier programs and you get the higher, the royalty playing well, because I think it brings a lot of enthusiasm to the NCAA tournament. It'll bring a lot of watching to the NCAA tournament. And these are fan bases that travel. So I'm excited that these teams are playing well at the right time. And to go 8-1-1 in NCHC play, really good. And impressive that they were able to turn that around, because we were talking for a while that they were a bubble team. They're bubble no longer.
Yeah, I think that, you put it right there in perspective, Derek. 8-1-1 in the NCHC. This is a league where you feel like there's just not a night off. Every opponent is a little bit tougher. You still have 5 teams that are in the top 10 of both the PairWise and the national rankings. I mean, it is hard to win a lot of games consistently in that league. And what they've done, after being low, I mean, you get swept by Cornell at home, then you lose 2 to Western. You're at a low. And how they pull themselves out of that, especially, battling some injuries. They lose, good player to the Olympics. I mean, this is a team that's done really well in what could have been a very tough stretch. So they need to get 2 points, I think, to ensure that they at least get a share of the regular season title, or they need to get just 1 win, 3 points, and they'll clinch yet another NCAC title. It's really impressive what Brad Berry's been able to do with this team since they got into the NCHC.
Quinnipiac. They continue to drop in the PairWise, but they haven't been giving up any goals. I mean, between Parrots and St. Cyr, they've got 14 shutouts on the season. They've given up 8 goals in their last 10 games, but they're 7-3 in that. Just 2 goals in the last 5 games, and they're 3-2. But they are dropping in the PairWise, and I think this is a little bit of math that makes some sense. This time of year, a loss hurts your winning percentage much less than it does early in the season. So that part of the RPI is less volatile. Yet the teams you've played continue to rack up a record. And since that's 75% of the number, that can continue to drag you down. And we've talked before about the difficulty in the ECAC this year with teams at the bottom of the league really pulling down the rest of it. I mean, is this crazy? Is this a case of not getting run support, or what's the deal there with Quinnipiac?
Well, I think it's a few different things. Yeah, I mean, you've had 2 1-0 losses in 2 weekends. That is not one thing that a coach enjoys seeing. But at the same time, I don't have a ton of concern, though they give up so little in terms of offensive opportunities. But I do think this could be the first time we could see I think they can get to 30 wins here, and they are probably in the 30% range to be a number 3 or a number 4 seed in this tournament. That's kind of crazy that, that they could drop and not, we know that they're not going to be a number 1. I don't see a mathematical way for them to get up to number 1 in the pair, in top 4 of the PairWise and number 1 seed. But, you'd hope that they hang on for a number 2 seed, but they could drop to a 3, maybe even potentially down to a 4 seed. That's crazy to think that this team could have, close to 30 wins or maybe over 30 wins and, not be to see that and not have a number 1 seed just blows my mind.
Well, we were talking about them as a 1 seed for a while. And they were ranked number 1. I mean, this is a team that doesn't give up a lot. They don't give up odd man rushes. They do a good job protecting their goalies. They don't give up a lot of shots, and they find ways to win low scoring games. I mean, Rand obviously will be coach of the year in the ECAC. I mean, he should be. The amount that they give up and the job that he's done, but they are really in danger of falling to a 3 seed. Now, is that a 3 seed that you'd want to play? I mean, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's a 3 seed you want to get in a 1-game series where they're going to not give up odd man rushes. They're going to get the goaltending they've been getting. And don't forget, they do have a very talented offense, and they did add some players through the transfer portal that have won. So you're going to have an experienced team in the NCAA tournament. So this is not a team that you're going to want to face in a one and done. That's for sure.
No, I can only imagine being a team like, say, Western Michigan or Notre Dame, where you feel like you were in a 2 seed and then you face Quinnipiac in the first round of the tournament. That is kind of a nightmare scenario.
The Bobcats were one of 4 teams in ECAC hockey to get a first round bye, as with 12 teams, the bottom 8 play down to 4. I think this one's a pretty obvious answer. How much does it help a team this time of year when you're banged up and bruised and guys are playing hurt and maybe guys are going to get surgery at the end of the season? How big is it to get that week off this time of year?
Well, it depends how you're playing. And I think a lot of it is if you're playing well, you don't want that weekend off because you don't want the other team you're going to play is going to come in playoff tested. They've won a series or a game or whatever, a high emotional week, and they're going to feel good about themselves. And yes, you want to get rested. And yes, you will always take the bye. You always move on to the next round. But if you're not playing well, it gives you a lot of time to think and a lot of time to reflect on what's coming up. If you're playing well, you just want to keep playing. You don't want to sit and wait and let somebody else get hot. And because whenever you take an off week, it always takes a tad to get ready to get back into it. And especially getting back into a playoff game or a playoff series after somebody's already played there. You don't want that. And, you sometimes see the number 1 seed or the high seeds that have taken time off trailing after the first period or losing the first game and then coming back and winning the next 2. So you see that happen an awful lot. And if you're playing well, you just want to keep playing.
You bring up an interesting point, and I want to switch over to a league you're familiar with, Atlantic Hockey. With 10 teams in the league this year, The bottom 4 teams are playing down to 2. So the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th seeds get a week off and are playing a team that had a week off, and they know who they're playing in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the top 2 teams, AIC and Canisius, have to wait for the result of these first round games, and then they will be facing a team that has just won a playoff series. That's kind of an interesting situation. It almost sounds like it's a better situation for 3, 4, 5, and 6 than it is for 1 and 2.
Well, yeah, you're going to prepare. You get a chance to prepare. I mean, can you imagine being Brian Riley and Frank Serratori, two military academies, the rivalry that they have, and now they're going to play a series? I mean, it's Shark Week on those 2 campuses leading up to 2 weeks of it. I mean, I know how Frank is when you play Army, and it's, I mean, yeah, it is an interesting dynamic with the 11 team or 10 teams, because with 11, it was just 4 or 5 that was already predetermined. And then you had to scramble, like you're waiting for game 3 sometimes. And those are series that a 7, 10, 8, 9, those aren't upsets. And we've debated that before. Those are teams that are very close. So AIC and Canisius are sitting there. They might see a game 3 and they're not going to be able to start preparing until Monday, while these other teams have 2 weeks to prepare.
Right. And if Mercyhurst prevails, they would play Canisius, who they just swept. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'm sure we'll talk more about Atlantic hockey after the first round coming up. But let's move on to the next thing. And it's kind of where we started out in the Big Ten. Notre Dame sweeping Michigan. And I was going over some of the stats from the weekend and so forth. And this one jumped out at me. And Derek, I'd love to get your take on this as a coach. I'm looking at numbers, shots on goal, fairly even, really great games from Matthew Galida in net both nights for Notre Dame. But the stat that stuck out to me that was very different between the 2 teams was blocked shots. Notre Dame had the advantage 24-5 on Friday night and 20-4 on Saturday night. So Michigan had a whole lot more shot attempts, but Notre Dame did a great job of blocking them.
I mean, that shows Michigan had the puck. And I think as you're a coach and you're dealing with the shot blocks and people, because you see, hey, you have to start working on, it gets in your head after about 10 of them. Because then on the bench, you're constantly, hey, change the angle, change the lane of the shot, get around a guy, pass around, pass off the backboards, do things, shoot off the side of the net. And it changes your thought process a little bit, and it frustrates you. And that's a frustrating stat. Playing Army's like that too. And we talk about Army is they block shots. They'll block them with their head, with their face. And you always are constantly worrying about that. But Bemidji State does an unbelievable job with their second layer of shot blocks. So if you do a good job getting around the first guy, their D are blocking shots net front. So it messes with your psyche a little bit, and messes with, is it, I think the stat that it really shows is guts too, and how hard you're getting your team to play that night. And if you're having back-to-back one-sided shot blocks, one, you got to start touching the puck more, but 2, your players are selling out to make sure that when you don't have the puck, they're doing a good job defensively.
I agree with you, Derek, and everything you just said. And it does get into your head. I mean, if you're going to see numbers like that, you're actually playing pretty well if you're Michigan. If you're going to give a team a chance to block 50 shots on the weekend, you had the puck a lot. And that means you had some great offensive zone time. But you're right. Frustration does mount. And that I'm sure this is a good Michigan offense that scored just 1 goal on back-to-back nights. They are way too talented to only come out of a weekend with 2 goals. So hats off, though, to Notre Dame. I think that they're playing well. And, when we look at playoffs in the upcoming series that we have, boy, it gets kind of scary. If you're, you're a team that's going to face Notre Dame, maybe not just in the opening round where they'll get Wisconsin, but, next round, I can't even tell you where the bracket aligns, and I guess you have to see who wins all the series. But imagine if you're Michigan and you see Notre Dame coming into your building yet again. That's kind of a scary thought, knowing that you just got swept by them.
Well, you know what? The funny thing is, we'll talk about the CCHA as well, but teams are like the teams that are playing each other have beat each other pretty bad. I think it's Bemidji and
Bowling Green.
They play Bowling Green. I think Bemidji's 4-0 against Bowling Green or something like that. And Lake State's like 4-0 against Northern. I'm sure if I'm wrong, somebody out there will correct me. But with that being said, it's hard to beat a team 5-6 times in a year. I mean, the odds just aren't in your favor. So there's going to be some, you talk about Canisius potentially getting Mercyhurst after being swept, Michigan potentially getting Notre Dame after getting swept. Those are some mental challenges that teams are going to have to overcome as well. There's more in playoffs than just there's guts, there's getting pucks in deep, there's getting pucks in and out, managing the game, but there's also a mental game. And the mental game is going to be a strong play this next couple of weeks.
We know Jeff Jackson's team's getting back to Notre Dame, play his system, and he gets them playing disciplined and well. It seems that maybe the missing piece for him this year was getting Matthew Galida in net. He talked to us about being on the phone last year with Mike Schaefer, and Mike saying, hey, here's a guy for you who can play his fifth year. What difference has he made? I mean, we talk about it this time of year. If you've got somebody who's really solid in net, you can go all the way with a great goalie. Is this the situation for Notre Dame? Do they have the pieces to take it to the national championship?
Well, I think that goaltending has always been a big part of what makes Notre Dame good. You can think of a lot of goaltenders that I can go back to, Dylan St. Cyr, Cal Peterson. I mean, they've had difficult to beat goaltenders for, pretty much the entire time that they've been in the Big Ten. But when I look at, just sheer numbers and what they're putting up of late, I mean, Matthew Galida now 50-5. He's got his goals against average down below 2. He's got a save percentage up above .932. I mean, this was a guy who at times we thought was going to, lose the starting job to Bischel, but he's held in there, stuck with it. And now he's kind of playing as that Cornell Matthew Galida that we all knew, grew to know and have some great success in the Ivy League and ECAC. So now he's bringing that to the Big Ten. If he gets hot, this is a really difficult team.
Well, I would say the one thing going to playoffs that I always told our team that you're going to see is every play matters. And every play matters. You may think it's just a neutral zone turnover, but that could come back and haunt you. Every play matters. But the biggest thing, you got to get great goaltending. If you're getting average goaltending, you're in big trouble in a short series or even a one game.
Well, let's take a pause here, and we got some more coming up, including a look at teams on the bubble. But this podcast is brought to you by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Sometimes it's not about wanting a new car, it's about needing one. And I needed one I could rely on. So I got an auto loan with DCU. They offer the same low rates on both new and used cars, and I was able to borrow a little extra to make a used car as good as new. My auto loan from DCU means a ride I can finally rely on, which feels like a pretty big thing. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
Continuing now with the Weekend Review podcast for February 28th, 2022. Let's look at some teams on the bubble and kind of give our quick hits on whether they're in or out. Sort of a buy-sell, I guess. But I'm looking at the list that Jim gathered up for us, and 4 of the 6 teams are in Hockey East, and 5 of the 6 teams on the list are in the East. And before we jump in, over the last couple of weekends, Eric Lang and Brian Riley were guests on a radio show in Fargo, North Dakota. And something the hosts brought up to both coaches is that the East is really screwed up in how the leagues are set up. You got 33 teams or 34 teams in 3 leagues. You got enough teams in the East to have one more league, which would be one more auto bid. And here we're looking at 4 teams in Hockey East, and there's no way all of them are going to make it in. So I'll just throw that out there, something to mention. Not that we have to go down that road, but rearrangement, realignment, maybe that'll be a good off-season topic for us. But let's take a look at the bubble. The only Western team in this is Ohio State. They're in a pretty good position, but they could rise or fall based on what happens in the Big Ten playoffs.
You know what? I thought you were going to like some major controversial topic. You're off script a lot today. I was like, we're going realignment? Come on, Ed.
No. We'll put that on the list for another show.
You want the Colonials? Where are we going? We're Robert Morris to the Big Ten. Is that what you were going to start? I mean, I don't know what you.
No. Well, I'll tell you what. Both Riley and Langer were adamant that Atlantic Hockey's got to get off the beam and get you guys back in right away. So. Well, that's not even controversy. I mean,
I need to listen to this show then.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Anyway, I do recommend it. But let's get back. Let's talk Ohio State. They're on the edge right now. They could rise, they could fall, they could stay about where they are depending on what happens in the Big Ten playoffs.
I've been bullish on them for most of the year. I've been a buyer. If we're buying or selling on them, I mean, you got they're going to get Wisconsin, I believe, in this weekend. And
Penn State.
Oh, they got Penn State. Oh, they were the tiebreaker. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. But a lot of shots. You're going to have to. There's a big separation in the Big Ten. So I think when you're talking about teams that are the buying or selling, that's an interesting one because there's a massive separation from 42 points to 20. But I'm a fan of Ohio State. I think they'll get the job done.
But Jim, the interesting thing about that is if Ohio State makes it in there, you're talking 4 of 7 teams from the Big Ten, because we know Michigan, Minnesota, Notre Dame are all probably in right now. Is that possible? Is that a reasonable thing to have happen, or is it just too much on the edge with other things?
No, I think that it's pretty reasonable. I would give Ohio State above an 80% chance of getting in, but it really does come down to what this weekend brings. They've had a week off. They didn't play this past weekend. And before that, they had a really tough stretch of 4 straight losses to Minnesota twice and then Michigan twice. And, they're not exactly going into, Derek used the expression earlier, leaking oil. They're leaking a little bit. Did they maybe plug some of those leaks while they were on break this past week? Maybe. And I do think that the separation between an Ohio State and a Penn State, despite the fact that it's pretty close, I still think that separation is probably enough that they get by. If they get past this weekend, I have no problem. They're going to make the NCAA tournament. They can kind of clinch it up, especially if they can sweep. If you can get past Penn State in 2 games, that'll help you a ton. But I don't see any reason that Ohio State will miss it as long as they get past this weekend. Now I'm going to give the caveat. They lose this weekend, they probably won't even have to watch games next weekend because they're probably out of the tournament. That's how thin a margin it is for them.
Well, getting back to the East, here's the point on 4 leagues. Ohio State probably wouldn't be in the conversation, or maybe somebody from the NCHC or the CCHA wouldn't make it in because of an extra auto bid. But let's look at Hockey East. 4 teams on the list here, Jim. I don't think you're going to see more than 2 of those 4 get in there. It would be a real stretch to get 3 of them, I think. But let's take the team that's furthest out right now, and that's Providence. What do the Friars have to do?
They have to win the Hockey East tournament. There's absolutely no doubt about that in my mind. I mean, there's slight percentage chances. If they were to get to the championship game, they don't play this upcoming weekend. So they're only going to have a maximum of 3 more wins without winning the Hockey East championship. 3-1 down the stretch, probably still not enough to do. I don't see Providence in unless they win the Hockey East championship.
I think we've been on this for a while. We're going to have 5 Eastern teams. Probably 5. I don't think there's any way, because I think they're all going to cannibalize each other. Correct. So you're going to have 5. You're going to have 5 Eastern teams. And when we go to this bubble here or the whatever, I'm glad I'm not on the committee this year. I mean, the movement that they're going to have. I mean, look at AIC. AIC right now, if they were to win Atlantic Hockey, the Atlantic Hockey winner is an Eastern team per se. But if you're going to go bracket integrity, you're going to send them west, and you're going to keep Mankato west. So right there, you're already going to send one of the teams from east to west, and then you've got 4 teams playing in the east. I mean, I don't see how any of these teams, unless they start winning and start, some teams get to the finals per se and get their PairWise up high, and then the team, like you said, Providence, then becomes the next team in. Maybe there's a 6th team because of upsets, but I think you're looking at 5, and I don't see how all these teams make it in that you have on the list here.
Yeah. And I agree. And in Providence, 21-13-2 is a pretty decent record. And usually 20 wins is sort of your cutoff on the bubble. It just feels like this Friars team, I don't want to say underachieved, but a couple of key losses here and there has been the whole difference between them being a number 18 in the PairWise and maybe top 10.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, Nate Lehman understands that his team left some on the table this year. But you just mentioned the 20-win cutoff, and an old friend of mine that's worked in the industry for a long time always said that the magic number, he always considered the magic number to end your season with was 23. If you get 23 wins, you would get into the NCAA tournament. Right now, I did the math yesterday, and I don't have it in front of me. Providence was one of the teams, but there were 3 teams that I counted that could get to 24 wins and still miss the NCAA tournament. And at the same time, you're likely going to have a team from the NCHC get in with 18 or 19 wins, so that just shows the strength of a conference RPI is really impacting some of these clubs to have, potentially 3 24 win teams miss the tournament. It's unheard of. It's never happened in the history.
Jimmy, you just called them clubs. Are we starting? Are we going to go franchises? Are we getting? We're leading up to the tournament. You're just calling them franchises. Are you Barry Connelly this week, or are you just Jim? I mean, so I agree with you. I think that you're going to have all these teams, but let's ask the big question: is this a COVID problem because of all these teams that didn't play, especially in the ECAC, that are struggling to get back because they lost a lot of players, or they had a whole off season. I mean, I think there's a lot more at play this year in this whole scenario. I don't know. I feel like, in leading up to this, I'm not the math guy, so I let you do the math, and I just want to talk about these teams. But I don't think you'll ever see a year like this again, where you're going to have such a West domination of the NCAA tournament field.
Well, and you mentioned COVID. The one thing I know, coaches set schedules, sometimes a lot of years ahead, 3-4 years ahead. But I wonder how many teams changed their schedule based on COVID for this season. Did they cancel a few plane trips because of budgets, or because they wanted to keep their players off of airplanes? I look at Hockey East. Hockey East played only 8 games against the Big Ten, and they played only 7 games against the NCHC. And they had only 1 win against the Big Ten, 3 wins against the NCHC. So you're talking about, a conference that we're wondering why they're not getting more teams in. Well, they didn't play the 2 best conferences for the most part. I mean, you're comparing that to doing the math quickly, 42 games against the ECAC.
Well, and that's it right there, Jim. The ECAC had 8 teams that didn't play last year that are kind of trying to get their way back. Maybe among all of those, only Cornell has been pretty strong this year. And Harvard, but Harvard's a bubble team right now. So, I mean, it's
way below the bubble you're talking about. Yeah. So is Cornell.
So it's difficult there, but you're right. The situation in the ECAC affected Hockey East, and even affected Atlantic Hockey, although it probably wouldn't have made that big a difference. But again, this is the situation, and this is where it gets back to what Lang and Riley were talking about with leagues. You have 2 leagues in the West that were engineered for the postseason by not having any bottom feeder teams. And you have the Big Ten, which is all big schools, and you're not going to have that situation. Those leagues are set up for success. The ones in the East, by taking everybody in, are set up to maybe get dragged down a little bit. So, but COVID, I think Derek's exactly right. This is a year, maybe 2 years, where these leagues in the East are affected by the teams that were so badly hit by not playing last year.
I will even take it another step further. You're also talking about schedules that you talked about schedules. Hey, I'm already done my non-conference schedule for 2 years for 23. I've got my non-conference games. I could get two more if there's only 26, 24, whatever it is. But I'll also throw this in the mix. Teams change their schedule, but they also changed them because of teams not playing. Ourselves, Anchorage, Fairbanks. People were scrambling for games. I mean, Atlantic Hockey, when we dropped for this year, they went from 28 to 26. So then they had to add games. So everybody's schedule was really changing. And I think, like you said, Jimmy, buses, and they didn't want to get on flights. And, people were adding games this year in the middle of the season. Well, how many times do we talk about that? So yes, I think a lot of it all plays into effect of how this all played out. And it all comes back to, I hate to use the excuse of COVID too. I mean, I think we got to get past all that, but it has affected play this year for a lot of teams and their schedules as well.
Well, why don't we dive back into those other three teams in Hockey East that are bubble teams: Northeastern, Lowell, and BU, in that order, right on the edge. One or two of those are not going to make it in.
I'm just going to, you know what? I've said my piece. I'm going to defer these Hockey East guys to Jimmy and to save some time here. He's got this all down. And I'll go ahead, Barry. Jimmy.
Yeah. Which organization is going to make it?
Which franchise do you have?
Well, these teams will be playing for the Stanley Cup. No, I look at it right now, and just by sheer numbers, Northeastern has the best chance of those three teams to make it in. BU, until yesterday, where they lost to BC 3-1, and that's, believe it or not, that becomes a bad loss for them. But they're still, I think, 14-2-1 in their last 17. But that doesn't matter. That's not a criteria anymore. It used to be. I still wish they'd bring that one back. But BU is now below the bubble, and they're going to have to get some wins here down the stretch. They're not going to be able to be a one and done team in the Hockey East tournament. We know that much. Lowell has to, get a lot of help. They need to sweep New Hampshire this weekend, and then they have to advance a couple of rounds, at least in the tournament, probably get to the Garden at least. So I don't see Providence getting in without winning the tournament. I think, it's Northeastern probably does get in, and then it's either Lowell or BU. I don't see both.
The last team on the bubble for us to address today is Clarkson. And we've talked about the ECAC situation. They've got the first round bye, but winning anything except a semifinal probably doesn't help them out in the PairWise.
I unfortunately see Clarkson's as having maybe one of the most dire situations. If they don't win the ECAC, I have them as less than a 3% chance of getting in. That's how you can't even get to the ECAC final if you're Clarkson. You have to win this. They're in a very similar situation to Providence. It's not that they've hurt themselves. They're going to be a team that potentially misses the playoffs with a really good record. But like we just said, records don't always matter this year. It's more about who you played. And, these conferences that did not get a chance to play Big Ten and NCHC teams, even if you lost to them, they would have been good losses to bolster your overall strength of schedule. So not playing any opponents from that league, or very few opponents, has hurt so many of these ECAC teams. If Quinnipiac, we know that they're going to be in the tournament. If they win the ECAC tournament, the ECAC will get one team in. There's no doubt about that.
Some of the conferences are going into the first round of playoffs this weekend, and we know there are always going to be some upsets when it comes to playoff time. What are some things to look for this weekend on the playoff landscape?
Well, first of all, I want to correct myself. I threw out some incorrect stats earlier about Bowling Green, Bemidji, and Northern and Lake Superior. So I want to correct myself before somebody on the internet corrects me. So I was wrong. But in my opinion, I don't see much as far as upsets, because I don't really count a 7-8 or in Atlantic hockey where you got the 7-10, 8-9 or a tight 8-9 series. I don't count those as upsets. If you look at I think the most interesting playoff series are going to be coming from the CCHA. The one is between Bowling Green and Bemidji and Northern and Lake State. I think those are going to be the most interesting ones. I don't see a way that the other two series can Ferris steal a game at Tech. They aren't playing poorly right now, maybe, but I don't see them taking Tech down to getting 2 games in Houghton. So I think the most interesting ones right now are leading forward, and you're going to see the battle of the Upper Peninsula between Northern Michigan and Lake Superior and Bemidji and Bowling Green.
Yeah, I think one we already talked about a little bit that's really interesting to me, though, Penn State, Ohio State. Can Ohio State right the ship and, kind of get back to where they were back in January? Or are they getting into a dangerous place for them, and a Penn State could walk in and maybe pull off an upset and get a couple of games there? And next thing you know, they, pummeled 120 shots over 3 games on net and they pulled off 2 wins. That to me seems feasible, but it's still, that to me would be a true upset.
With the strength of the Big Ten, Jimmy, though, would you, if somebody in the Big Ten beat somebody, would it surprise you?
Well, if Michigan State beat Michigan, it would shock me. That's about the only.
But that's such a rivalry, though. The emotion of that.
There will be some emotion, and I think we just mentioned BU and BC. BU as hot as they come, BC as cold as any team in the country heading into Sunday, and BC pulls off a 3-1 win. Now, granted, it's on home ice, and that can sometimes factor in, and Michigan State's going to have to go on the road. But I don't see any reason that I would just absolutely say, Michigan State should have a chance in this one. They shouldn't. It shouldn't even be close. They have not played that well in the second half of the season. Emotions aside, I don't see them winning, even having a prayer in that series.
Well, that's why we play the games, right? I don't disagree with you. I'm throwing that out there to play devil's advocate because of the emotion in the series, and they have had some one-sided games in this series, especially lately. So I don't see it, but the emotion will play high. Will be a part of playoffs. Throw that Michigan State, throw the Army, Air Force, throw those all in, and it's going to make for some interesting playoffs. That's for sure.
Well, it is the best time of year in college hockey, and we'll wrap this edition of Weekend Review right here. This has been sponsored by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. For Jim Connelly, for Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.